So many choices. So many choices. Don't even know where to start. Yeah, let's keep going. So many movies, dude. Which one should I watch? Yeah, let's watch this. Okay, I've heard okay things about this. Let's give it a try. Let's just kick back. Yeah, let's let the movie begin.
2 hours later.
What the fuck was that?
Fantasy fucking Island.
Hey guys, let's talk about Blumhouse's Fantasy Island, based on the 1970s to 80s TV show of a similar name.
The plane. The plane. The plane.
The plane! The plane!
One of the worst movies I've ever fucking seen. This is going to be more of a rant/review than a true synopsis. So if you want a full synopsis of the story, I'd look elsewhere. But I don't think it's really worth looking for a synopsis anyways, because this movie is hot garbage. The movie starts with 5 people arriving to Fantasy Island, and they all come to the island knowing, hey, our fantasies are going to be made true, okay? So Brax and J.D. Weaver step off the plane, played by Crazy Rich Asian sensation Jimmy O. Yang and Ryan Hansen, respectively. Their fantasy is basically partying and having fun, which ends up being a big mansion-style party with lots of hot chicks and lots of hot dudes for Brax, because Brax is gay.
Oh, you think being gay means all I want is shirtless, ripped, juicy, delicious men? I got layers, dudes.
These two guys totally steal the show. I would love if they had their own spin-off. This movie, as I said, is hot garbage, but these two guys basically make the movie worth watching, because everything they're in is hilarious.
You guys high five a lot?
All the time, baby.
Patrick, played by Austin Stoll, just wants to know what it's like to be in the army. He wants to serve. Now, he made a promise to his mom that he wouldn't serve in the army because his father died in service. He threw himself on a grenade. Very heroic. His fantasy comes to fruition when he actually joins his dad in the jungle the day before he dies. And there's this whole thing where the father doesn't believe the son, and the son doesn't believe it's really the father, and who knows what's actually happening. But it's actually really emotional, and it's probably one of the best parts of the movie. Some of the best acting in the movie, and the most, it's the part of the movie that pulls on your heartstrings the most. Gwen, played by Maggie Q of Nikita legend, y'all remember Nikita? She just wants a do-over. She said no to her boyfriend's proposal 5 years ago, and all she wants to do is be able to go back in time and say yes. She said no because she was in a really dark place in her life. Later on, she changes her mind and actually wants to do over the event that put her in that dark place in the first place, which is kinda dark. She accidentally set a fire, which resulted in the death of her upstairs neighbor in her apartment complex. Ugh, guilt. Muy guilt. Even Mr. Rourke, the host of the island, played by Michael Pena, or however you say it, has a fantasy. He wishes he wasn't such a shitty actor. I'm just kidding. We find out his fantasy is to bring back his late wife Julia, who probably died after witnessing just how shitty an actor he is. Last time. That's the last time. Last time. Melanie, played by Lucy Hale, has a fantasy of getting back at her high school bully who tormented her for years. Her name's Sloane, and she's played by Portia Doubleday. Yeah, that's right. Her name's Portia Doubleday. What a name. Alright, but spoiler alert, we later in the movie find out that Melanie's real fantasy is the reason that everybody ended up at the island in the first place. You see, her boyfriend Nick was the dude who died in that fire, and you see in the movie how they all had a part that played in his death. Gwen started the fire, Brax and JD were Nick's roommates, and they evacuated the building without ever checking his room, so they're also a little bit to blame. We find out Patrick was the policeman at the scene, and he prevented anyone from going back in the building to go help him. So they all had a role to play in the death of Melanie's boyfriend. And that's the reason why they all end up at the island. It's really her fantasy, and then they all have their little, like, sub-fantasies. Sloane, Melanie's arch nemesis who bullied her all those years, was the only person who was actually kidnapped and brought to the island against her own will. Everyone else willingly went on the plane and was under the impression they'd have their own fantasy, which they did. JD gets shot and killed when armed men storm their mansion party.
Hey, laser pointer.
At the end of the movie, Rourke reveals to Brax that he didn't actually live out his fantasy, he only took part in his brother JD's fantasy. So Brax wishes his brother was alive again, and poof, JD is on the plane. Brax has to stay on the island as the servant, basically a slave, forever to keep the fantasy alive. Because as soon as he leaves the magical island, JD would, poof, be dead again, basically. Fun fact, Brax's nickname is Tattoo because in college, he got a tattoo that says Tattoo. This mirrors the TV show where Mr. Rourke's dwarf midget sidekick is named Tattoo.
Welcome to Fantasy Island, Tattoo.
So basically, throughout the movie, you find out that the island works because it has this like magical core in this maze of tunnels. There's a magical core and it can see into your soul and it knows what your fantasy is. And it infects the water or something and it turns the water black. That's why you always see these dripping black water things everywhere during the movie. And when people die, their eyeballs become all black and stuff. But guess what? They never destroy the magical thing. They don't like kill the island and, you know, finish it forever. It's really dumb. At the end of the movie, there's actually a grenade that comes into play. They're gonna take the grenade and they're gonna destroy the center of the island. Destroy the weird fantasy stuff. Because the fantasies always turn evil somehow. There's always a weird twist in the fantasy. But you know what happens instead? We find out Sloane also didn't get a wish yet. Because remember, she was brought to the island against her will. She never had a fantasy yet, so she drinks the magical water, and her fantasy is that Melanie dies, basically. So Melanie gets pulled into the fucking pool where the evil core thing sits above. It's so stupid. She comes back, she throws a grenade out, and instead of, you know, taking the grenade and throwing it back, Patrick, just like his father, jumps on the grenade, sacrificing himself to save everybody else. So there you are at the end of the movie. A bunch of characters are dead. Brax has to stay on the island forever because he brought his brother JD back. Patrick is dead. He jumped on a grenade. Melanie's dead because she's a cunt. And they're all just going home. They're going to be like, la la la. Which raises the question, apparently people die here all the time. And it's just cool. People go on vacation. They don't come back. No one asks any questions. Mr. Rourke does kind of answer this somewhat. He says, when you leave the island, it's kind of like a dream. You don't remember the specifics. You remember like the impression it left on you. So, I mean, whatever. There's a lot of things I thought were dumb in this movie. Number one, how does the island know your desire? Supposedly the island knows what your deepest desire and fantasy is. You see this when they find the core of the island and it has a reflection of whatever their fantasy is. For Gwen, it's being married and having a daughter. For Sloane, it's seeing her and her husband getting back together. But there's a point in the movie where Gwen wants to say yes to the proposal, have a husband, have a kid. That's her fantasy. And then later on, she just changes her fantasy and says, no, the island got it wrong. That's not my fantasy. I said I wanted to do it over, and it got it wrong. I wanted to do over the house fire and be able to save that dude who lived above me. I thought if you only have one true thing in your heart, you can't switch it. So what's up with that? That's weird. Another thing, whose fantasy takes priority? Because as we know, Melanie's fantasy was for all these people to die, basically, as revenge for her boyfriend being killed, which, by the way, she went on one date with.
Holy shit, she went out with him one time?
She went on one date with this guy, and now she wants to fucking murder all these people who couldn't save him? Wow. Talk about crazy. So she has her fantasy, and then below her original fantasy, she has a fake fantasy of wanting to get revenge on Sloane, which she's basically pretending, because we all know what a real fantasy is. And then there's all these also sub-fantasies. So if she wants everybody dead, but then Sloane wants Melanie dead, how come Melanie dies? Why doesn't Sloane die first? You know, it's like, who came first? Is this a first come, first serve fantasy island? How's it work? I don't know. Another thing I really hated about this movie is Michael Pena. Say what you want about Michael Pena. Everybody seems to love Michael Pena, and I don't have anything against him personally. I'm sure he's a great guy, and if I saw him in person, I'd probably be like, dude, I'm sorry I said you suck in that YouTube video. I'm real sorry, dude. You're a cool guy. But I don't think he's that good of an actor. Personally, he basically acts like himself. He has like the same 3 facial expressions. I think if you just grabbed a guy off the street, it'd basically be the exact same performance. I'm convinced the only reason he keeps getting these blockbuster roles is because of his Scientology connections. That's the only reason I can think of personally. Can we talk about Michael Pena's terrible accent in this movie? It's just so over the top and bad. It just takes me right out of the movie.
Let me officially welcome you to Fantasy Island.
Welcome to Fantasy Island.
Nobody knew what you meant by that!
I know I'm probably doing a really bad job of explaining why this movie is so bad, but it's just one of those things you need to watch it and just see it. The plot is terrible. It's all over the place. Basically, the only redeeming quality about this movie is Brax and JD. They're so fucking funny. They're my favorite part of this movie.
No way.
Bling, bling!
Oh, shit, wait, I was late. Do it again.
Okay. Bling, bling!
It's a steaming pile of dog shit, but I'd still watch it again just for the JD and Brax hijinks because they're so fucking funny. It's always nice when you can go to the internet and confirm your suspicions because this movie got 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, 4.8 on IMDb, and 22% on Metacritic. So it's not just me who thinks it's bad, alright? I challenge you to go watch this movie for yourself and see just how terrible it is.
Have a good night.